"Sir, we're losing them, one by one." Head nurse Janet Rodriguez's voice trembled as she watched the incubators in the NICU systematically powering down, their gentle humming replaced by an ominous silence that seemed to suck the hope out of the room. 23 premature babies, some weighing less than 2 pounds, lay helpless as their life support systems began failing, according to a carefully planned schedule designed by insurance executives who had never held a dying child in their arms. Baby Jessica, born at 22 weeks, was the first to go critical when her respirator stopped its rhythmic breathing assistance. Then tiny Marcus, whose heart monitor flatlined for 30 terrifying seconds before manually restarting. Elvis heard about the crisis by pure accident when he took a wrong turn looking for the hospital chapel where he sometimes went to pray before performances. What he witnessed through those NICU windows would make him question everything he thought he knew about his purpose in life. But to understand why Elvis would risk his entire career to intervene in a situation that wasn't his responsibility, you need to know about the letter he had received that morning, a letter that connected this crisis to a memory he had been trying to forget for years. 3 months earlier, Elvis had visited a children's hospital in Memphis, where he met a little girl named Sophie who reminded him so much of someone from his past that he couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. Sophie had been born prematurely and spent her first months fighting for life in a NICU just like this one. When Elvis held her tiny hand, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for someone so small, and whispered, "Are you the singing angel?" That morning's letter was from Sophie's mother thanking Elvis for giving her daughter hope during her final days. Sophie had passed away the week before, but she had spent her last months talking about the singing angel who promised her that every baby deserved a chance to grow up. It was October 15, 1976, at St. Mary's Medical Center in Las Vegas. Elvis was scheduled to perform his final show before flying to London for what would become his most ambitious world tour ever. The venue was sold out, 25,000 fans waiting to see the king one last time before he conquered Europe. But 3 floors above the main lobby, in the neonatal intensive care unit, a different kind of performance was ending, one where the audience was too small to applaud and too young to understand that their final curtain was falling. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the real story. While Elvis prepared to entertain thousands, 23 of the smallest, most vulnerable performers in the building were about to have their life support literally unplugged. It was October 15, 1976, at St. Mary's Medical Center in Las Vegas. Elvis was scheduled to perform his final show before flying to London for what would become his most ambitious world tour ever. The venue was sold out, 25,000 fans waiting to see the king one last time before he conquered Europe. But 3 floors above the main lobby, in the neonatal intensive care unit, a different kind of performance was ending, one where the audience was too small to applaud and too young to understand that their final curtain was falling. "How much time do we have?" Dr. Sarah Mitchell asked as she reviewed the shutdown schedule on her clipboard, her hands trembling not from nervousness but from pure rage at what she was being forced to do. Dr. Mitchell had spent 15 years in neonatal medicine, had saved hundreds of premature babies, had celebrated countless victories against impossible odds, but never in her career had she been asked to participate in what felt like systematic murder. The shutdown schedule was precise, clinical, designed by actuaries who dealt in probabilities rather than possibilities. Stage 1. Disconnect monitoring equipment for babies with less than 20% survival probability. Stage 2. Remove respiratory support for babies under 2 pounds. Stage 3. Terminate intensive interventions for babies who had been in the NICU longer than 8 weeks. Each stage would claim lives, but the insurance company had calculated that it would save them approximately $2.3 million per month. Her hands were shaking, not from nervousness but from pure rage at what she was being forced to do. 48 hours. That's how long Consolidated Medical Insurance had given them to transition the non-viable patients to comfort care only. The euphemisms made her sick. These weren't statistics in a ledger book, these were babies, human beings who deserved every chance to fight for their lives. "The equipment truck arrives Monday morning," Janet replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll disconnect everything systematically, starting with the babies who have been here the longest." The irony was cruel beyond measure. The babies who had fought the hardest, who had survived the longest against impossible odds, would be the first to lose their lifeline. Elvis had finished his sound check and was heading to his dressing room when he decided to stop by the hospital chapel. It was a ritual he'd started years ago, a quiet moment of gratitude before taking the stage. But tonight, something felt different. The hallways seemed too quiet, the staff too somber. When he took a wrong turn near the elevator bank, he found himself in front of double doors marked Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, authorized personnel only. Through the small windows in the doors, Elvis could see rows of incubators, each one containing a tiny form barely visible beneath blankets and wires. But something was wrong with the picture. Half the machines were dark, their screens blank, their life-giving sounds silenced. A woman in scrubs stood with her back to the door, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Another nurse was carefully disconnecting monitors from incubators, her movements methodical but reluctant, like someone forced to dismantle something precious. Elvis pushed through the doors without thinking. "Excuse me, sir, you can't be in here." A young nurse named Rebecca rushed toward him, but stopped when she recognized who he was. "Mr. Presley, this is a restricted area." But her protest lacked conviction. In the face of what was happening in this room, hospital policies seemed meaningless. Elvis barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the incubators, on the babies inside them. Some were so small they could fit in his hands. Tubes and wires connected them to machines that beeped and hummed, or should have been beeping and humming. Nearly half were silent, their tiny occupants lying in an ominous quiet that felt like death approaching. "What's happening here?" Elvis asked, his voice quiet but urgent. He moved closer to one of the dark incubators, where a baby so small it looked more like a porcelain doll lay motionless. The nameplate read, "Baby Girl Martinez, 1 Limb 2, 12 Oz." "Excuse me, sir, you can't be in here." A young nurse named Rebecca rushed toward him, but stopped when she recognized who he was. "Mr. Presley, this is a restricted area." Elvis barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the incubators, on the babies inside them. Some were so small they could fit in his hands. Tubes and wires connected them to machines that beeped and hummed, or should have been beeping and humming. Nearly half were silent. "What's happening here?" Elvis asked, his voice quiet but urgent. Rebecca glanced around nervously, checking to see if Dr. Mitchell or any of the supervisors were watching. "Sir, I really can't discuss patient information with unauthorized personnel," but then she looked at the babies, at the machines being systematically shut down, at the parents who had been crying for hours as they watched their children's lifelines disappear one by one. And she decided that sometimes rules mattered less than humanity. "These babies are being disconnected from life support," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The insurance company says they're too expensive to keep alive. We're supposed to transition them to comfort care only," which means she couldn't finish the sentence. "What is happening to these babies?" Elvis's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded stages for 20 years, but also the desperation of someone who suddenly understood that something terrible was unfolding before his eyes. His voice echoed through the unit, and several parents who had been keeping vigil by their babies' incubators looked up with a mixture of hope and despair. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her clipboard, where she had been reviewing the shutdown schedule for the 4th time that day, hoping somehow the numbers would change, the orders would be different, the nightmare would end. She had been dreading this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe it was time someone with influence knew what was really happening in pediatric medicine when corporate profits collided with human lives. "Their insurance coverage has been terminated," she said bluntly, no longer caring about hospital policies regarding patient confidentiality or media relations. Consolidated Medical Insurance decided that keeping 23 premature babies alive costs more than they're statistically worth. The words tasted like poison in her mouth, corporate euphemisms that reduced miracles to mathematics. "Their insurance coverage has been terminated," she said bluntly. Consolidated Medical decided that keeping 23 premature babies alive costs more than they're worth. The words tasted like poison in her mouth. Elvis stared at her, unable to process what he'd just heard. "What do you mean, more than they're worth?" The company ran the numbers, Dr. Mitchell continued, her professional composure beginning to crack. Average survival rate for babies born before 24 weeks is about 30%. They calculated that it's cheaper to let them go than to continue treatment that might not save them anyway. Elvis felt something cold settle in his stomach. How long do they have? 48 hours, Janet replied, her voice barely above a whisper as she watched baby Emma Chen's oxygen levels fluctuate dangerously on the monitor. The equipment truck arrives Monday morning at exactly 8 a.m. They'll systematically disconnect everything, starting with the babies who have been here the longest. It was a twisted logic that rewarded survival with punishment. The babies who had fought the hardest, who had overcome infection and surgery and countless setbacks, would be the first to lose their lifeline simply because they had cost the insurance company the most money over time. Janet had been a NICU nurse for 12 years. She had seen miracles happen in this room, had watched babies who weighed less than a can of soda grow into healthy children. She had also seen heartbreak, had held grieving parents as they said goodbye to children who couldn't fight any longer. But this was different. This wasn't medicine failing, this was medicine being forced to fail by people who had never spent a single hour in a NICU, who had never watched a 2-pound baby take their first breath without assistance, who had never seen the look in a parent's eyes when their premature child finally got to come home. Emma Chen was one of the fighters. Born at 23 weeks and weighing just 1 pound 14 ounces, she had survived 3 surgeries, 2 infections, and countless close calls. Her parents, Linda and David Chen, had been living at the hospital for 6 weeks, taking turns sleeping in chairs beside her incubator, learning to read the monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of their daughter's fragile existence. Yesterday, Dr. Mitchell had given them the news that Emma was finally stable enough that she might be able to come home in another month or 2. Today, she had to tell them that their daughter would be dead by Monday afternoon. The equipment gets repossessed Monday morning. After that, she couldn't finish the sentence. Elvis walked slowly between the incubators, reading the names on tiny cards attached to each one. Jessica Marie Thompson, 2 pounds, 4 ounces. Marcus Anthony Williams, 1 pound, 15 ounces. Sophia Elena Gonzalez, 2 pounds, 1 ounce. Each name represented a family, a dream, a future that might never happen. What about their parents? Elvis asked. Most of them are here around the clock, Rebecca said softly. They know what's coming. Some have already started saying goodbye. As if summoned by her words, a woman appeared at Elvis's shoulder. She was young, maybe 25, with exhausted eyes and clothes that looked like she'd been wearing them for days. Are you here about the babies? She asked, hopefully. Are you someone who can help? Elvis turned to face her. I'm not sure. What's your name? Linda Chen. This is my daughter, Emma. She gestured toward one of the active incubators, where a baby so small she looked more like a doll lay surrounded by wires and tubes. She was born at 23 weeks. The doctors said she had a fighting chance, but now, her voice broke, and Elvis instinctively reached out to steady her. Now they're saying it doesn't matter how hard she fights, Linda continued. The machines that keep her alive are too expensive. They're just giving up on her. Elvis felt something shift inside him, something that connected this moment to every loss he'd ever experienced. Every time someone had told him he wasn't worth the investment. Every dream that had almost died because someone with power decided it cost too much. How much? He asked suddenly. Well, Dr. Mitchell looked confused. How much what? How much does it cost to keep them alive? Mr. Presley, it's not that simple. How much? Elvis's voice echoed through the unit, and several parents who had been keeping vigil by their babies' incubators looked up. Dr. Mitchell pulled out her clipboard and flipped through several pages. According to the insurance company's calculations, approximately $47,000 per baby per month. For 23 babies, that's over $1 million, Elvis finished. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Per month, Dr. Mitchell added quietly. And some of these babies could need intensive care for months, maybe longer. Elvis was quiet for a long moment, staring at the babies, at the desperate parents, at the medical staff who were being forced to play God with innocent lives. When he finally spoke, His voice was different, calmer, but with an edge of steel that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Call the insurance company. Tell them Elvis Presley wants to speak with whoever made this decision." Dr. Mitchell blinked. "Mr. Presley, I don't think." "Call them now." Dr. Mitchell exchanged glances with Janet, then walked to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. Within minutes, she was connected to someone at Consolidated Medical Insurance who seemed very interested in taking a call from Elvis Presley. "This is Dr. Mitchell at St. Mary's NICU," she said into the phone. "I have Elvis Presley here, and he wants to discuss the premature baby situation." She listened for a moment, then held the phone out to Elvis. Elvis took the phone. "This is Elvis Presley. I want to talk to whoever decided to kill 23 babies." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Presley, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not killing anyone. We're simply discontinuing coverage for treatments that have a low probability of success." "What's your name?" Elvis asked. "Robert Steinberg. I'm the Director of Claims Assessment." "Well, Robert, let me ask you something. Do you have children?" "Mr. Presley, my personal life isn't relevant to—" "Do you have children?" Elvis's voice carried through the entire unit. "Yes, sir, I do." "How much would you pay to save your child's life?" There was another pause. "Mr. Presley, you have to understand, we have actuarial tables, statistical models." "That's not what I asked." "How much would you pay to save your child's life?" Anything. Everything I had." "Good. Then you understand what these parents are going through. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to restore full coverage for all 23 babies, effective immediately." "Sir, I can't authorize that kind of expenditure." "The board of directors." "Then get me the board of directors." "Mr. Presley, they're not available at this hour." "Then make them available. You have 1 hour." Elvis hung up the phone and turned back to the room full of parents and medical staff who had been listening in stunned silence. "1 hour," he announced. "If they don't call back with authorization to continue treatment, I'll handle this differently." Linda Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Presley, what do you mean?" Elvis looked at her, then at her tiny daughter fighting for life in the incubator. "I mean, I'll pay for it myself." The room erupted. Parents began crying. Nurses started talking all at once, and Dr. Mitchell dropped her clipboard. "Mr. Presley," Dr. Mitchell said, picking up her papers, "do you understand what you're saying? This could cost millions of dollars." "I understand exactly what I'm saying. These babies deserve a chance to live. If their insurance company won't give them that chance, I will." Janet Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, there's something you should know. Even if you pay for their care here, there's no guarantee they'll all survive. Premature babies, the statistics are—" "I don't care about statistics," Elvis interrupted. "I care about giving them the chance to prove the statistics wrong." He walked back to Emma's incubator, where Linda Chen stood with tears streaming down her face. "My daughter might die anyway," Linda whispered. "Even with the best care, she might not make it." Elvis reached out and gently touched the incubator. "But she might live, and that possibility, that chance, that's worth everything." The phone rang. Dr. Mitchell answered it, listened for a moment, then handed it back to Elvis. "Mr. Presley?" It was a different voice this time, older, more authoritative. "This is James Wellington, chairman of the board at Consolidated Medical. I understand you're interested in the premature baby situation at St. Mary's." "I'm interested in saving 23 lives," Elvis replied. "Mr. Presley, I want you to understand the financial implications of what you're suggesting. These babies could require intensive care for months, possibly years. The total cost could exceed $10 million. Elvis was quiet for a moment. $10 million. It was more money than he'd ever spent on anything. It was enough to buy mansions, cars, jewelry, all the things that had once seemed important. "Mr. Wellington, let me ask you something. What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought?" I suppose my house in Malibu. "About $3 million? And was it worth it?" Yes, I believe so," Well, I'm about to buy something worth a lot more than your house. I'm going to buy 23 chances for miracles." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Presley, if you're serious about this, we'll need financial guarantees, legal documentation. Then get your lawyers. I'll get mine. But those machines don't get turned off. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until every one of these babies has had their chance to fight." Elvis handed the phone back to Dr. Mitchell and turned to address the room. "I need to make some phone calls. I'm canceling my tour." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Linda Chen gasped. "Mr. Presley, you can't. Your career—" "My career will survive. These babies might not." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward. "Sir, are you sure about this? The financial commitment?" Elvis looked around the room at the 23 incubators, at the parents keeping vigil, at the medical staff who had been forced to prepare for the unthinkable. 42 years ago, my mother gave birth to twins. One of them lived, one of them didn't. The one who didn't live was my brother Jesse. He never got a chance to fight for his life because 42 years ago, they didn't have machines like these. They didn't have the technology to save premature babies. His voice grew quieter, more personal. "I've spent my whole life wondering what Jesse would have been like, what he would have accomplished, what kind of man he would have become. These 23 babies, they're getting the chance Jesse never had. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let some insurance company take that away from them." Linda Chen walked up to Elvis and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving my daughter a chance." One by one, other parents approached him. Maria Gonzalez, whose son Antonio was born at 22 weeks. David and Susan Wright, whose daughter Rachel had been fighting for life for 6 weeks. James and Patricia Williams, whose son Marcus had already survived 2 surgeries. Each had the same message. "Thank you for giving our child a chance." Dr. Mitchell pulled Elvis aside. "Mr. Presley, I want you to understand, even with unlimited funding, we can't guarantee outcomes. Some of these babies, the odds are still against them. Doctor, let me ask you something. If one of these babies was your child, would you want them to have this chance?" "Yes, absolutely." "Then, that's all I need to know." Over the next 3 hours, while 25,000 fans waited in an arena across town for a concert that would never happen, Elvis made the phone calls that would change 23 lives forever. He called his manager, Colonel Parker, and informed him that the world tour was canceled. He called his lawyers and instructed them to draw up agreements with St. Mary's Hospital for unlimited funding of the NEC. He called his accountant and authorized the liquidation of assets if necessary. Each phone call cost him millions in canceled contracts and legal penalties. Each decision moved him further away from the comeback tour that was supposed to revive his career and secure his financial future. And with each call, Elvis felt lighter, as if he was finally doing what he was meant to do. "The lawyers will be here in the morning," he told Dr. Mitchell as dawn began to break over Las Vegas. "Until then, I want those machines running. I want every baby getting the best care possible. Mr. Presley, there's something else you should know. The hospital board is meeting in emergency session. They want to thank you personally." "I don't need thanks, I need results." As if summoned by his words, Janet Rodriguez rushed over with a chart in her hands. "Dr. Mitchell, Jessica's vitals are improving. Her oxygen saturation is up, and her heart rate is stabilizing." Dr. Mitchell looked at the chart, then at Jessica's incubator. "Babies are fighters," Elvis said quietly. "Sometimes they just need to know that someone believes in them." Over the following weeks, Elvis became a regular presence in the NICU. He would arrive each morning, sometimes still in his stage clothes from the night before, and make rounds to check on each baby. He learned their names, their weights, their daily progress. He celebrated every small victory and grieved every setback. Baby Emma Chen was the first to be removed from the ventilator. After 2 months of intensive care, she was breathing on her own. Her mother, Linda, wept when Elvis held Emma for the first time, her tiny hand wrapping around his finger. "She knows you saved her life," Linda whispered. Marcus Williams followed 2 weeks later, graduating from his incubator to a regular crib. Sofia Gonzalez learned to bottle feed. Jessica Thompson gained enough weight to go home with her parents. Not all the stories had happy endings. 3 of the 23 babies didn't survive, despite having every possible medical intervention. Elvis attended each funeral, standing quietly in the back while families said goodbye to children who had at least been given a chance to fight. "Do you regret it?" Dr. Mitchell asked him after the 3rd funeral. "The money you've spent, the career sacrifices, do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" Elvis looked through the NICU windows at the remaining babies, most of whom were now thriving. 20 babies went home to their families. 20 children will grow up, go to school, fall in love, have children of their own. 20 futures that wouldn't have existed without this chance. He paused, thinking about Jesse, about the brother who never got to take a first breath. "The only thing I regret is that it took me 42 years to understand what really matters." The final baby to leave the NICU was Antonio Gonzalez, who had spent 4 months fighting for his life. When his parents carried him out of the hospital, Elvis was there to see them off. "Mr. Presley," Maria Gonzalez said, holding her son close, "how can we ever thank you?" "Just love him," Elvis replied. "Love him every day, and remember that he's a miracle." The financial cost of saving 23 premature babies was exactly what the insurance company had predicted, over $10 million. Elvis liquidated properties, canceled tours, and restructured his entire financial life to cover the expenses. But the real cost was measured differently. 20 families had their children. 20 babies grew into toddlers, then children, then teenagers. They went to school, played sports, learned music, fell in love, and had families of their own. Dr. Mitchell, inspired by Elvis's commitment, started a foundation for premature baby care that continues to save lives today. The St. Mary's NICU was renamed the Jesse Presley Neonatal Intensive Care Unit in honor of the brother who never had a chance to fight. Linda Chen's daughter Emma grew up to become a pediatric nurse, dedicating her life to caring for sick children. Marcus Williams became a doctor, specializing in neonatal care. Sofia Gonzalez became a teacher, touching hundreds of young lives throughout her career. Each of them carried the same message. Sometimes miracles happen when someone believes in the value of a single life. Years later, when reporters asked Elvis about the decision that cost him millions and changed the trajectory of his career, his answer was always the same. "I learned that being the king of rock and roll means nothing if you can't use that power to help people who need it most." Those 23 babies taught me what real success looks like. The story of Elvis and the premature babies became legendary in medical circles, studied in business schools as an example of choosing human values over financial considerations, and told in hospitals around the world as proof that sometimes one person's decision can change everything. But perhaps the most important legacy was simpler than all of that. 23 children lived because someone believed they deserved a chance. 23 families were complete because someone understood that love is more valuable than money. And one man found his true purpose by learning that the greatest performance of his life wasn't on any stage, but in a hospital room where the only audience was too small to applaud. In the end, Elvis Presley didn't just give 23 babies a chance to live. He gave himself a chance to become the man he was always meant to be. And that transformation, like the babies he saved, was nothing short of miraculous. What would you do if you had the power to save lives, but it cost you everything you thought you wanted? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories about the moments that define who we really are.